The lime tree. The lime sapling had now turned into a full-grown tree. Amma looked at it lovingly. Like a professional dancer who throws her legs and arms in all directions, the tree's branches were sprawled across the sky. There was no semblance of a flower or a fruit, just the expanse of a barren tree. Amma had spared no remedies to coax it to flower. She had tried over and over, but with no results. It stood there, all by itself, like the chariot that had reached the north side of the temple. Earlier, Amma had worked on other trees which were also stubborn. She followed the advice of an old soothsayer woman of the village. The remedy was simple. A menstruating woman wearing a single piece of unstitched cloth facing east should tend the tree before the sun came up. This remedy had worked wonders in the past, but couldn't shake the resolve of this particular lime tree. It was around that time that we began raising a dog. The dog was not any sort of pedigree. He was a street dog, picked up on my way home from school. He licked my face and hands and made me his slave. Amma initially had a fit, but changed her mind after she saw him greedily drink his milk. He staggered around sideways, heaving his blown-up belly. She joined in my laughter, and the pup became part of our household. We named him Viran, or warrior, in honor of the heroic deeds he performed. He grew fast, and when it came to food, Viran did not have any preferences. He was happy to eat anything that came his way. When we sat around in a circle for dinner on the floor, he too would sit with us, and without bias, lap up whatever we had: rice, string hoppers, pitu, palm fruit, or at times meat bones that were too hard for human teeth. If he saw me chewing something, he followed me around. I had to share with him whatever I ate. Only after I finished eating and showed him my empty hands would he wander off. He had an inordinate love for the free lunch bread served at school. The sound of the school bell would make him restless and agitated. As soon as I came home, he would jump up on me, snatch the school bread, and run off. Viran grew as tall as a little pony, tall enough even for me to ride on his back. When I was with him, the elders in the village kept a respectful distance from us. When he was old enough, he would run after Kannagi, the only bitch in our lane. Kannagi was the kind of dog that got around. Half the dogs in our village were after her. Perhaps she was given that name because of her dark black coat of hair and eyes, like those of her namesake, who burnt the town of Madure down. One night we heard him barking and chasing something in the yard, and then heard a loud plop sound, followed by a long silence. Amma shouted, "Listen, it looks like Viran has fallen into the well." We ran to the well, carrying a hurricane lantern. A gurgling noise was coming from the depths of the well. All our efforts to pull the dog out with a rope and a bucket proved futile. Finally, it was Padre Shanmugan who decided we should use a small cradle instead, and Viran was saved. As soon as Viran was out, he shook his mane, sprayed water on everyone, and ran away. Kandaya teacher taught us math. He had an extreme philosophy, and during his lessons we were ordered to put all our fingers on the table. All math questions were to be worked out mentally, and we were forbidden to use our fingers. Viran loved math and our teacher's philosophy, and would stray into the classroom unobserved to lick my feet. Once he settled in, he would add a groan and a moan like a woman suffering the pangs of love. Kandaya teacher heard the sounds before seeing the dog. He carried dog-bite scars right from his ankle to his knee under his dhoti. As soon as he saw Viran inside the class, he lost control and screamed at us, "Hold the dog! Take him away! Away!" He stood as if preparing for war, with one foot on the floor and the other on the chair, ready to jump in any direction. I figured it was good enough excuse to leave school and came back home, dragging Viran behind me. I was very happy that I now had a weapon I could use against my teacher, so happy that I conveniently forgot to return to school that afternoon. After that incident, Amma kept Viran chained until I came back from school. At night, he was left out to keep watch over our house and was free to roam around and attend to his duties. It was a Saturday, a day set aside for having an oil bath, and the entire house was in an uproar as usual. They got me ready for the bath, smearing oil on me from head to toe. The next stage was to apply the sikaikai, already ground and mixed to a paste, onto my head and body. While I was left to soak up the oil, Amma examined the lime tree. Worry did not suit her face. Her eyes were filled with a sadness I had never seen before. It was the season when limes were sold cheap, 10 for 1 cent. Still, Amma was obsessed with that tree and intent on making it yield. Just the previous day, a hired laborer had come to turn over and dig the earth around the tree and water it. The tree stayed there with a nonchalance once attributed to barren trees. Amma must have been tired of prodding her lime tree. She stood there, hands on hip, lost in thought. She had a reddish-yellow complexion, like that of a lime. When she looked up at the tree, a speck of kumkum dropped on her nose. It looked beautiful, like a ruby nose ring. I wondered what she was thinking then. Amma need not have worried all that much. An event was soon to change the tree's fate, and ours. Neither Amma nor I knew about it at that time. I had soaked more than the quota of oil for that day, and some was getting into my eyes. I kept tugging at Amma's sari for attention, but she did not move from where she stood. She kept peering at the lime tree. And then it happened. Our maidservant came running towards us, panting for breath. "Come, come quick! Viran has bitten the village chief," she shouted. Dog bites were very common in our village, like tick bites or bug bites. Before I was 8, I had been bitten 3 times by dogs. All different dogs and on different parts of the body. But I was ashamed to speak of it in my class at school. My classmates had much more prestigious bites. One was bitten 4 times, and another 8 times. They delighted in showing me their scars. The treatment for a dog bite was very simple. We went to our village medicine man, who chanted mantras and rubbed the juice of some secret herbs into our hair and pulled the hair 3 times in strategic directions. That was it. My dog bite experience was more memorable than that of the village chief. I rarely poked my nose into someone else's affairs and generally managed to stay out of trouble. Kennedy, the bitch of our lane, probably sensing my naivete, once tricked me into an unfortunate incident. I was yet again on a mission to collect breast milk in a coconut shell to treat my eyesore. I followed my usual route. I first went to the house in front of ours, but the milk supply there had dried up. Then I turned to the neighbor right next door with an iron gate. That house had a perennial spring. Milk welled up 24 hours a day, and as soon as a Zaku auntie saw me, she came to the door, loosening her blouse. As I was returning, carrying the shell full of warm milk with both hands, Kanagi saw me. Excited, she began to chase me. Kanagi was especially fond of the flesh of small boy bottoms. She had, perhaps, been fasting all day, lying in wait for me. Before I could throw the shell and climb over the fence, she reached out and bit me. I ran to Amma, howling in pain. Amma pulled my trousers down and shouted, "Ayo, 3 teeth marks!" In that instant, all my pain vanished and my heart began to jump with joy. As soon as I heard 3 teeth, my heart began to jump with joy. I finally had a respectable bite about which to boast to my class. The largest bite so far had been by 2 teeth. Viran was very much unlike Kanagi. He was disciplined, obedient, and endowed with all the qualities of a village dog. He ate whatever he was given, and stayed in his allotted spot in front of the house, minding his own business. He slept when it was time to sleep, kept awake at the right time, and attended to his duties as a watchdog. He participated in street brawls and stuck with all those general dog traditions. Biting humans had never been part of his resume. How could he have bitten the village chief? He had been listless over the past 2 days, lying down frequently and curling up like a rag, his blue eyes turning yellow. He had been walking with great difficulty, too, unable to carry the weight of his own body. But no one expected that he would attack a person, let alone the village chief. The next day at school, all my thoughts were about Viran, but my teacher didn't know that. She had a round face, like a 1-cent coin, and, as always, was hammering the intricacies of grammar into our heads. My mind was chasing frightening thoughts. Viran has never bitten anyone. Why did he have to go and bite the chief of all people? Will something happen to him? All I wanted was to run home and be with Viran. My fears were proved right. When I reached home, there was a small crowd assembled in our front yard. My father and other important village people were gathered. I was worried. Amma waited until I came closer and helped me up the veranda. Viran was rabid, she said. People were sure to die if he bit them. I was warned not to go anywhere near him. It was then that I saw Viran. He was standing by the fence, his head bent down from his shoulders. He panted while he barked. His tail was tucked between his legs. With his tongue lolling out, he stared in front of him, unseeing. He didn't look like my Viran. In the span of just 4 days, he had become unrecognizable, like a diseased banana plant. The story spread through the village and people gathered. The crowd was now divided into two, and the debate was getting hotter. One side advocated the case that the dog should be killed. The other side wanted to wait for a few more days. Neither was willing to yield. The village medicine man began to speak in his impressive voice. In our village, he was a learned scholar who had mastered the alphabets, and thus qualified to speak on such intricate matters. His measured words followed a strict rhythm, like the slow, steady drum beat at funeral processions. Listen to me, and listen carefully. The dog barks when offered water. He does not drink it. His tongue hangs out. He is definitely rabid. There's no doubt whatsoever. His words were pronouncements. The inquiry committee's meeting came to an abrupt close. No one could refute the word of such a respected personage. I did not feel it was fair to decide the future of Viran without letting him say a word in self-defense. The maidservant appeared with further news. It was her habit to appear quite suddenly in that manner, like a goddess appearing to grant a boon. With her finger on her cheek and a nod of her head, she took one look at me and casually said, as if announcing the amount to be gifted at an auspicious function, "Chelathambi has been appointed by the committee to kill the dog." And with that, she vanished. It's strange how, in villages, a person will get singled out to perform a specific task. One could never trace the origins of how one came to be assigned particular duties. If a cow or a horse had to be shod, it was always a certain person you turned to. It was another if you wanted someone to go up the coconut trees and pluck coconuts of the right tenderness. And if a mad dog had to be killed, there was only Chelathambi to do it. He had become famous because of his expertise in such executions. I wondered how many dogs you had to kill to become the designated dog killer. Chelathambi came stealthily, his arms locked behind his back. His arm muscles were rounded and firm. The piece of cloth he had thrown over his shoulder could not completely hide the scar from a scythe on his back. Viran was tied up. Around his neck were 2 lassoed ropes, one tied to a tree and the other to a stake in the fence. Viran stood in between, legs spread out, immobile. Perhaps he sensed the calamity that was to befall him. There was not a sound from him, not even a groan. He must have searched for a friendly face in the crowd around him. His yellowed eyes fleetingly looked directly at me and turned away. The crowd assembled in no time, as if they had been invited to a bridegroom-choosing ceremony. The youngsters of the place jostled with one another in the crowd. Chelathambi hooked his upper cloth to a tree and folded up his dhoti, and somebody, on signal, handed him an iron-rimmed pestle. Holding the pestle in one hand, he advanced slowly toward the dog, breaking through the fence of people. I was ashamed for a moment to realize I too was curious to see how the dog would be beaten to death. In a matter of a split second, Chelathambi approached the dog, swung his weapon, and hit the dog right in the middle of his head. A pitiful wail, "Gna!" was heard throughout the village, and the dog fell to the ground in a heap. When I went to Viran, there was a drop of blood on his head. His skull had cracked, and the brain tissue was flowing out like white liquid. His eyes were wide open. His teeth were exposed, and they seemed to be grinning at me. My heart traveled slowly up to my throat and threatened to choke me. The story of Chelathambi killing Viran spread all through the village. Everyone was talking about the incident. They never tired of repeating over and over how he lifted the pestle, swung it, and brought it down on the dog in one precise stroke. When the assemblage had dispersed, Aya asked Amma, "What do we do with the body?" Amma wiped her eyes and said, "Bury it under the lime tree." Even though the dog had been killed, fears as to the fate of the village chief still hung in the air. Villagers went often to his place to see if he was alive. They whispered among themselves that it took a fortnight for a bitten man to go mad first and then die. As for the chief, he applied the herbal poultice prescribed by the medicine man and left it at that. Even when some people insisted that he should get a cart ready and go to the town hospital, he vehemently shook his head in refusal. The Saturday after the incident was the 8th day, Sunday the 9th, and so the days sped by, and soon it was the 14th day. Nothing untoward had happened. The chief looked as fresh and robust as a tapioca pulled out of the earth after a rainfall. There was no trace of the dog bite, and he resumed his duties as before. That was how I lost a childhood friend. I kept hearing the dog's last wail for nights on end after the killing. When he was being dragged away, he had looked at me. Those yellowed eyes searching for one friend in a crowd continued to haunt me over the years. That year, Amma's lime tree had flowers in so many clusters that they managed to hide the tree. Soon fruits appeared. The morning saw the ground under the tree covered with light yellow lime fruits. It was a plentiful harvest. Amma picked the fruits, and even as she gathered them, more and more seemed to appear. She filled many massive jars with lime pickles. When we all sat in a circle on the floor to have our dinner, Amma served us newly made pickles. They smelt divine as they were taken out of the jar. The sourness touched the middle of your tongue, and it burned against the throat with its sharp tang. Aya never praised Amma readily for any of her cooking skills, but that day was an exception. He commented, "The pickles are wonderful." Everyone sat in the same circle where Viran normally joined us and relished the pickles.